viewers, and welcome to Autistic Disney Princesses, a series that I definitely did not completely forget about somewhere around a year ago, because that would be so unlike me. The whole Every Disney Princesses Autistic series is the first series I ever came up with before I was even solid about whether I was going to make a YouTube channel or not, and my views of autism and neurodivergence have changed so much in the last 3 years since starting it, and it's been very interesting to see how that impacts how I do media analysis while following the same formula over time. Definitely have felt myself shift from these characters are definitively autistic to here's an autistic and sometimes wider madness analysis lens with which we can look at this character to teach us more about how we've always existed in the media canon and what different autistic and otherwise mad experiences may look like to help us understand them better. Now, Elsa's been my top requested princess since I started the series consistently. She's already been in my autistic Broadway medley that honestly I think I hate that it exists, but it does exist and I'm not going to get rid of it because I told myself when I made my channel that unless something was actively harmful, if it was just cringy for me, it was going to stay up because other people might find value in it. Anyway, the plan for this video was for that it was not going to happen until my research deep dive into disability and Wicked was done, and that came out in October. So now we're here. The other thing I want to say, and then I swear I'm done and we'll get into it. Oh, just kidding. I am a white young person with light brown hair that is in a really, really messy French braid, and I'm sitting in front of a plain wall that has green leaves on it, and I'm wearing a dress that you can just see the straps of that is like light blue and has white flower things on it. This is the worst cosplay I've done for this series. I try to consistently do fairly decent cosplays of these characters, but this is what I've slapped together. This is what I possess, so I'm sorry. Yeah. Anyway, the other thing that I wanted to say is that this franchise and I are not friends. I liked it when I first saw it, but I also worked with very small children during the era that this came out. I worked with kids from the Frozen era to the Moana era, and I stopped working with kids around when Encanto came out. So if you've ever had whatever the opposite of privilege is of working with or having small children during the peak of the Frozen craze, you understand what I mean by saying this franchise and I are not friends. Particularly as somebody who sang songs and wore their hair in a braid every single day at that time, the amount of times I was asked to sing Let It Go and called Elsa made me want to melt. I also saw the second movie in theaters on a date with somebody, and I was stimming because I like Disney things and it made me happy, and my date restrained me in the theater. So Frozen and I are not friends. However, if you are like me and you hear Frozen and your only thought is run and hide, you are valid, but also trust me when I say these movies are actually very genuinely very good. It is worth taking the time to rewatch them on your own. Really pay attention to them. They're a very good time when you are not being harassed by small children or really bad dates. Anyway, per usual, Disney story rundown, recap of the original story it's based on after that, then we're gonna do the sequel plot as well. I'm not gonna do a specific section on the musical, but I will mention it a few times throughout, because I watched it and it wasn't consistently different that much from the movie, nor did it give me more information about the characters that we're talking about here. And then we're gonna analyze Elsa through several different lenses and contexts, and then we're gonna call it a day. Alright, cool. So, Frozen came out on Thanksgiving Day in 2013 after various people had been trying to pitch an animated adaptation of the Hans Christian Andersen story of the Snow Queen for a very long time. Like, we have had sketches of an animated Snow Queen since the 1940s. Like, she's been around in the Disney vault for a hot minute. The story follows two sister princesses of Arendelle named Elsa and Anna. Elsa has magical powers of, like, ice and snow and cold stuff, and she can create snow and ice things with her hands. It's cool and magical, but when they were little and they were playing together, she accidentally hurt Anna with her magic, so the parents took them to the trolls in the forest, and the trolls took away Anna's memory of the magic and tells Elsa that she must learn to control her powers and that fear will be her worst enemy if she doesn't. And the parents then decide to isolate the castle from the rest of the kingdom and force Elsa into isolation to learn to control her powers, and then she gets into the habit of wearing gloves to help that because her parents kind of force her to. And Anna doesn't understand why suddenly they can't play together and why the castle gates are closed and what's going on, becoming very reasonably frustrated with everybody. Meanwhile, the parents go off on a trip on a boat and then their ship goes down at sea. So that's rough. Did they not have things with like royals on separate boats or something? Like, we put world leaders in different vehicles all the time. Like, I feel like this was, anyway. Okay, so now it's been 3 years since then. It is Coronation Day. Elsa's gonna be queen. First time the castle gates have been opened, and Anna's really stoked. She's ready to make a million friends and also fall in love and finally get to experience life. And then she promptly meets Prince Hans of the Southern Isles, and they have a whirlwind romance. And by whirlwind, I do mean like maximum 2 hours. And then they go to Elsa to ask for her blessing for them to get married. And Elsa goes, You can't marry a man you just met. And Anna then provokes Elsa and grabs one of her gloves, and then Elsa panics and accidentally shoots out some ice in front of the entire court. And the Duke of Wesselton accuses her of witchcraft, and she books it to the North Mountain, and this is where she realizes that in isolation and nature she literally cannot hurt anybody, and it is safer if she just lives out the rest of her life in solitude. She sings Let It Go, about how freeing it is to not be responsible for anything, not have to follow any rules, not have to hide who she is anymore, etc. My biggest question is, how the heck was she on a mountain in the middle of nowhere getting food, and also water, because she doesn't know how to make melted ice. Like that's canon, and eating snow and ice just further dehydrates you. So what's your plan, Ice Lady? How are we staying alive? This would also imply that her dress is made of ice, which would be cold and not move comfortably. So anyway, this is unimportant, but I'm the kind of person who watches movies and wonders when they pee and when they eat food. So this bothers me. Now, Elsa has no idea that she's accidentally sent Arendelle into eternal winter in the middle of summer, and so Anna wants to find Elsa to try to get her to return the weather back to summertime, and she leaves Hans in charge of the kingdom in her absence, which I am fairly sure is not how power and royalty works, but sure, whatever. On her way to the North Mountain, she meets a guy named Kristoff who sells ice and is best friends with a reindeer named Sven. They go together to the mountain, and on the way, they meet a sentient snowman named Olaf, who's just the littlest of little guys. He's just a little dude. And then Anna goes to Elsa and is like, hey, you don't need to hide anymore. I get it now. We can fight this together. I just need you to bring back summer. And Elsa's like, I made things worse. And if I go back, I could fail and I could make them worser. And I don't want to do that. And Anna, I could accidentally kill you. I need you to go away, please. But then that becomes an argument, and then she accidentally strikes Anna, freezing her heart, which will become permanent if she doesn't get warm. And so Kristoff takes her to the trolls to help, because Kristoff was raised by the trolls. And then the trolls say that only an act of true love can thaw a frozen heart, and so they bring her back to the castle to be kissed by Hans to fix her heart. While this is happening, Hans captures Elsa and locks her up in the castle dungeon. As you do. When Hans and Anna are alone together next to the fire, he almost kisses her, and then he goes, "Oh, Anna, if only there was someone out there who loved you," which, I'm sorry, what an incredible line, and very, very dark for a Disney movie. Turns out his plan all along was to come to the kingdom and marry into the throne and then kill off his wife and become the sole ruler of the country. Or the kingdom? What are they ruling over? Because it's part of... Anyway, the plan was to go after Elsa, but then he didn't think they would get anywhere with Elsa, so then he decided to go for Anna instead, and now he's gonna get rid of both of them, and then he puts out the fire in the fireplace and walks out and tells everybody that she froze to death. This scene is written so well, and it shocks me every single time how perfect every single line choice is. It is spectacular. Now, both Anna and Elsa manage to escape because... you know, and Elsa tries to run from what she's created, leaving a massive blizzard in her wake, and Anna runs through the blizzard to try to find Kristoff so that he can give her true love's kiss, because Olaf made her realize that actually they love each other, and Hans finds Elsa and tells her that Anna's dead, and it's also her fault, and then Elsa collapses with grief, and then the blizzard around her freezes in midair, and then Anna's nearly at Kristoff, and also nearly at the point of dying herself, but then she sees Hans pull out a sword over Elsa, and she's like, "No, you can't do that!" And so then she runs and uses all of her remaining strength to stop him, and then she turns into ice. And then Elsa is heartbroken and she hugs Elsa. Nope. Elsa hugs Anna and she cries, and then Anna thaws because that was the act of true love. And it was sisterly love, not romantic love. And Elsa realizes then that love is how she controls her powers, and so she ends the winter and Hans is arrested. Also, Anna punches him in the face. That's important. And then Anna and Kristoff share a kiss and they all vow to never close the gates again. The end. Woo. That was the most chaotic summary. Anyway, so the original story, The Snow Queen, was written by Hans Christian Andersen in 1844. I'm not sure what it is with me and lately analyzing things written in the mid-1840s that then have modern adaptations that place the story in the precise year in which it was written. I swear I didn't plan this, but this keeps happening to me. I love Hans Christian Andersen. It is widely agreed upon that he was both queer and autistic, and he infuses that into every single one of his stories, and it just makes me so happy to see people like me from long ago, you know? That being said, of all of the Andersen stories, this one is very difficult to follow, and I don't think that's just because of how it was translated. There's several different translations that I read. The story is just genuinely very disjointed and hard to wade through. It's divided into 7 parts. Part 1 is about a magical mirror made by a troll who is the devil. that reflects everything in the ugliest way possible. And the idea is that it will make everything terrible for everyone, and then they will carry it up to heaven to torment God and the angels. But instead, it accidentally falls on the way there, it shatters into a gazillion pieces that become all kinds of things, like window panes and eyeglasses, and some of them get trapped in people's eyes, which make them see the worst in everything, and some get trapped in people's hearts, which freezes their hearts like ice and makes them hateful people. In part 2, we meet two little children, a boy named Kai and a girl named Gerda, who are neighbors in a city and are the very best of friends. They play in their window box garden and basically consider themselves siblings, and it's really cute. Gerda's grandmother tells him the story of the Snow Queen who rules over snowflakes that look like bees, and so she's like the queen bee, and you see her where the snowflakes are falling the heaviest because that's all of the snow bees and they're all congregating around her. And also she flies around and she freezes windows in fancy ways, kind of like the Jack Frost myth that I personally grew up with. One day Kai sees her out the window, she tries to get him to come with her, he's like, LOL, no, and he steps back from the window. Now it's summertime, Gerda sings Kai a song about roses because roses always make her think of him, and then one day shards of the troll's mirror find their way into Kai's heart and his eye, and he becomes really mean and hateful, and he destroys a lot of stuff, including their beloved window box garden. In the wintertime, the only thing that he likes is the snowflakes, so he goes out on his sled to play, and he hitches his sled to a fancy larger sleigh that is moving quickly through the square, and then it just takes him away, which is a choice, but good for you. Turns out the larger sleigh he hitched himself to was the Snow Queen, and she makes it so he cannot feel the cold by kissing him, but it doesn't actually make him warm, it just makes him not feel cold any longer. She also makes him forget about Gerda and his family and flies him up into the clouds. In part 3, everybody in the town has decided that Kai has died in the river, and Gerda decides to go to the river with her favorite ever red shoes and offer them in exchange for Kai. But the river keeps returning her shoes, so she gets into a boat and she tries to go out to put them further in the river, but then she gets swept away. And eventually she comes upon an old lady who takes her in and takes care of her, but also likes her so much she wants to keep her forever, and so she wipes Gerda's memory of Kai, and she puts all of the roses in her giant flower garden back into the earth because they will remind her of Kai, and she doesn't want her to remember Kai because then she'll leave. Gerda plays in the garden all day every day, has a really great time and as happy as can be, but then one day the woman puts on a hat that has a rose in it, and she's like, a rose! Oh my gosh! Kai! And then she starts crying, and then her tears cause the roses to rise up from the ground, and the roses tell her that Kai is not dead because they were underground so they could see everybody who was dead, so they know. And so Gerda starts to ask all the other flowers to see if they know anything, and they all go on little rambles, they tell different stories that don't relate to anything. So Gerda decides to just run away. And she discovers that she had been at this old woman's house for so long that now it is autumn. Again, why is nobody searching for these children when they disappear? Anyway, in part 4, Gerda meets a crow who is like, I might have seen Kai, and tells a story of a princess who wanted to find a nice prince to marry. And so she met with a bunch of princes and none of them worked, but a small guy dressed not so nicely wandered in and they got along quite well and they ended up getting married and he became the prince. So they assume this must be Kai. So they go to the palace, but they discover that no, the prince is not Kai. The royals offer for her to stay there, but she asks for various things like a carriage to help her continue on her quest because she really wants to find her brother. In part 5, Gerda's carriage gets captured by robbers and they're gonna kill her, but then the little robber girl wants somebody to play with, so then they all go together to the robber's castle, and the bird has pet doves, and the doves tell Gerda that they saw Kai and that he was taken by the Snow Queen, and a reindeer offers to help her because he knows the way. Just roll with it. In part 6, Gerda is freed and travels with the reindeer to the palace. On the way, they stop at the homes of 2 different women who offer her advice, one of whom basically says that Gerda will be able to save him because her power is having the heart of a sweet and innocent child. In the final 7th part, Gerda enters the palace. She finds Kai on a frozen lake. He's using pieces of ice to form words because the Snow Queen told him that if he manages to create the singular word she wants him to spell, she will free him and give him a free pair of skates as well. Side note, this story feels very distinctly like, Here Children, this is the right thing to do with the examples of him spelling words. He also talks a lot about fractions and whatnot earlier in this, and there's a lot of moments where they get out of various pinches by reciting the Lord's Prayer. Like, this story is very child-specific, moral heavy in comparison to some of Andersen's other works, which honestly explains why it's caught on so much in society in comparison to some of his other stories, because it's really moral heavy. But anyway, He's spelling words, but he's also freezing to death, and doesn't realize that, I guess. But luckily, Gerda runs up to him and holds him tightly, which melts his frozen heart with her tears. And then he starts to cry, which makes the splinter from the mirror in his eye go away. And so he remembers Gerda, and he's a happy child once again. They dance together. The ice pieces he'd been using suddenly dance along with them, and then they fall into the word the Snow Queen had wanted, which was eternity. And then they, thanks to the two women Gerda met in part 6, and also the reindeer, leave the castle and go back home, where everything is the same, except Gerda and Kai have all grown up. The end. So in regards to similarities with Disney's Frozen, obviously Anna was based on Gerda. The initial plan was to make Elsa the villain and stick more closely to the story of the Snow Queen, but it seems like this sort of combined Kai and the Snow Queen to make her in the end. There is no personality information to work from really for any character here from the original story, so this is not going to help us in our analysis, but I still think it's an important and interesting context to have. And I just like to know the origins of things, because I think it's interesting to see how stories inspire other stories and how adaptation works. Now in 2019, we got the sequel, Frozen 2. This one is messier. There's more going on. It's a little harder to follow. Basically, they wrote it kind of in pieces and then went back to fix things last minute, but then they gave it to the test audience, and the test audience really struggled to understand it, but they still had a very strict deadline, so they had to absolutely grind to finish it on time. And lovingly, you can tell. Some parts are utter perfection and other parts feel a little unsure about themselves, and also they did something real weird to Olaf. I still really enjoyed it. I think there are things it does better than the first film, but it definitely has its issues. I will be leaning more heavily on the Wikipedia plot synopsis here, because I'm so much less confident on the plot of this one. So, we open on little Elsa, little Anna, hearing a story from their dad about their grandfather who had made a treaty with the nearby tribe of Northuldra who live in the Enchanted Forest, and the treaty involved building a giant dam in the Enchanted Forest as a peace offering. After that, some sort of fight happened, killing the grandfather and angering the forest spirits, and those spirits are earth, fire, water, and air, and then all the spirits disappeared, and the Enchanted Forest was enclosed by a giant wall of mist, and their father just barely escaped with the help of some unknown savior. I wonder who this could be. Flash forward to 3 years after Frozen, all of our favorite characters are celebrating the beauty of autumn, they're playing charades, everybody's having a good time, but then Elsa hears a voice calling her from the distance going, "Ah!" and she's like, oh my gosh, I have to follow it. And so she goes after it, which accidentally wakes up all the spirits who get really angry, and so they have to evacuate everybody from Arendelle. The trolls tell the sisters that they need to make things right by uncovering the past, so Elsa, Anna, Kristoff, Sven, and Olaf, all the great characters, follow the mysterious voice as it leads them to the Enchanted Forest. Elsa's able to part the mist with her magic touch, and so then they all go inside of the Enchanted Forest. There are lots of scenes throughout the section of the film where they meet one of the spirits who initially behaves in a rather hostile manner, and then Elsa's able to use her powers to stop it, and then when they reappear as friends. That happens a couple times. My favorite is the fire spirit, because he's just a little salamander guy, and I'm a very teeny tiny one because, oh dear, they were still selling Frozen 2 Kinder Eggs when I was studying abroad, and I kept buying Kinder Eggs until I got a little Bruni, because look at him. I don't know if you can, hold up. I don't know if you can see. Come on, camera, you can do it. I believe in you. Oh my gosh, there we go, look at him! He's just a little guy. I love him. He sits on my desk every day and I look at him and I'm just like, wow, he's cute. Now, in the middle of this, they meet the Northuldra as well as some Arendellian soldiers that have all been trapped behind the mist all these years, and they're still kind of angry at each other and like quick to draw weapons. And the sisters discovered that their mother had been Northuldra and also was the one to save their father. Shocking, I know. Which means that the two of them are children of both worlds, because their father was Arendellian and their mother was Northuldra. This then unites the Northuldra and the Arendellian soldiers, and they learn about the unknown fifth spirit who is said to be a bridge between them and the magic of nature. I wonder who the fifth spirit... Kristoff and Sven get left behind with the Northuldra. Kristoff has a whole subplot of trying to propose to Anna the whole film, but she's too focused on like saving the world and keeping her sister safe. And he doesn't seem to understand that, and it's really, really annoying and seems very out of place given the urgency of the rest of the narrative and also his character as a person. But the 90s boy band song Lost in the Woods that he sings slaps, and I cannot deny that. But the rest of them head north, and they find their parents' wrecked ship. They discover that their parents had been trying to travel to a mythical river that is said to explain the past, likely with the intention of trying to figure out what's going on with Elsa's powers. Elsa insists on going forward alone, and Anna says no, and so Elsa uses her powers to send her and Olaf away so she can continue on her own path, befriending the water spirit who guards the sea to the river. I also have a water spirit Kinder Egg little guy, but I don't know where that is. I don't think I have it here. She then discovers that the voice is actually the memory of her mother when she was young, and that her powers are a gift from nature because her mother had selflessly saved her father. And she also learned that the dam was built to deliberately cut down on the Northuldran resources because the sister's grandfather had hated how the tribe was connected with magic, and so he just straight up murdered the leader of the tribe, which started all of this conflict. Colonization. Bad. Now, Elsa sends this info to Anna before becoming frozen because actually she couldn't do it all on her own and it was very dangerous to be where she was, and so she becomes a block of ice. And then Anna gets the message and decides that the dam must be destroyed because it's the only way to get peace back, and so she awakens the Earth Spirit and she gets them to break down the dam, sending a flood down the fjord that will destroy Arendelle. But this then releases Elsa from her ice block, so she rides the Water Spirit, who's a horse made of water, and is animated so spectacularly. Also, I forgot to mention that oh my gosh, it's so good. And she uses her ice powers to freeze the flood before it destroys the kingdom. I personally think it would have been narratively interesting if they decided that their kingdom was built on hatred and lies and colonialism, and they let it go and then decided to rebuild in harmony with the local indigenous population, but that's fine, whatever. Elsa realizes that she's the fifth spirit. Shocker. And the two of them are the bridge between the people and the spirits. And then Anna becomes Queen of Arendelle and becomes Kristoff's fiance, and Elsa becomes the protector of the Enchanted Forest, and they live happily ever after. And they send notes to each other via the Wind Spirit. And it's cute. Also, Frozen 3 and Frozen 4 are both in the works right now, so that happily ever after is not going to last long for them. Or us, really. Anyway, moving on to autism. Analyzing autism in Elsa is very complicated, like really, really complicated. We're going to start with some traits and then work our way from there. First, we have masking, which is basically when an autistic person suppresses characteristics of being autistic, which can be intentional or accidental. It's also exhausting. A really clear version of masking for her is her literally trying to hide her powers and clearly overthinking every single situation so as to always at least appear calm and normal. Her whole conceal don't feel implies, oh no, my camera's gonna die. Stand by. Her conceal don't feel implies that not only is she masking, but she's also been taught that her feelings are too much and a danger to others, and she needs to hide them, something that reflects the autistic experience of you are too much, you are too sensitive, you need to learn how to handle your emotions better. A lot of people also see her getting overwhelmed and then lashing out in a way that kind of hurts people, as reflecting a lot of people's experiences having violent meltdowns. I also saw some comparisons between the conceal, don't feel, hide who you are from the world treatment from the parents to coercive ABA, where rather than saying, okay, so you do a thing that harms you and others, let's find the cause of that thing and work at it from its root and replace it with a different behavior, they just punish the symptom and try to train it out of her in a clearly ineffective and deeply traumatizing manner. I also saw some comparisons to the fact that it's revealed in the second movie that they traveled far away to try to learn the cause of her powers and how to fix or at least manage them, which even to this day there are stories of parents traveling far and wide to try to find answers and cures and support for their autistic children. Other more literal things are the fact that people interpret her as cold and unfeeling when she's actually very, very feeling, to the point where it eats her alive from the inside out. You just can't tell from the way that she emotes. She has a harder time controlling herself and her powers when she's very overwhelmed. She seems to see the world differently from everybody around her. She doesn't talk much. She prefers to pay attention to situations and only add a small amount of words when absolutely necessary. We also do see her stim when she's trying to control her powers, but then she doesn't stim when she's using them, which indicates that maybe using her powers is very stimmy for her. You could also say that she is hyposensitive in the sense of physicality, like the cold never bothered her anyway. She can deal with cold in her skin and not really notice it. That is a thing that many autistic people experience. One article I read said that she is hypersensitive to sound, in that she hears the voice of the second movie no one else hears. I would consider that to just be like, she's in tune with the spirits because she's one of them in a way that nobody else in her world is. But sure, we can interpret it that way if we want to. Why not? She also craves connection with others, but doesn't know how to do it in a way that is safe for both parties, so she convinces herself that she much prefers isolation, even when she doesn't necessarily. And then also, if we want to talk about specific word choice, she has a song in the musical called Monster that implies that she has been referred to as such and is starting to believe this about herself. The term monster historically meant something, quote, born outside the course of nature, and was often used to describe disabled children. So that could also point to potential disability and perceived disability. Disabilities in witchcraft were also sometimes interpreted to be one and the same historically. I'm working on a video about that. So there is an analysis to be had there as well, since Elsa is literally doing magic, but also being accused of witchcraft throughout the film. The thing for me that I primarily look at when analyzing madness in a character is their context. Like in my Sweeney Todd video, for example, most of the characters, you could argue they had experienced madness since birth, and we have enough textual clues of that, or their environment had created that madness for them, or some sort of combination of the two, such as Joanna, who we first meet when she's age 16 and has been locked in her bedroom for most of her life and never really socialized with anybody and is abused by her adoptive father, so of course she's going to be deeply anxious and scattered and struggle with normal communication. But then at the end of the day, those traits still look like a large handful of different DSM diagnoses we could ascribe to her and probably would be diagnosed as such in the real world anyway. So all of this to say, like, arguing that a character seems more one thing than another thing doesn't necessarily negate either possibility. It can very much be all of these options at the same time and just different angles of looking at the same character. Kind of like how reading a text through a queer lens does not mean the person in the text is inherently queer. It means that they could be queer or not queer. We are just opening up possibilities of interpretation outside of the norm, and all of them can be true at once. So anyway, context. Elsa. Her context is actually quite similar to Joanna from Sweeney Todd, which is why I brought that up, in that she has been shut in her room for the majority of her life and forced to hide all of her desires and true personhood, and will therefore show significant signs of complex PTSD as well as acute PTSD from when she almost killed her sister that one time, and generally sketchy social skills. Arguably, in general, royalty throughout history around the world are often known for being slightly odd socially just because of their environment and how sheltered they end up being, so that is on brand anyway. You could also argue that if there was one autistic royal, since they're all interbreeding with each other, the genetics would be across for the majority of royalty in the world, but that's not something we're going to get into. A whole lot of the traits I just listed above that look like autism could very much be a result of CPTSD caused by her upbringing and the effects of isolation, especially since we don't know much about Elsa's behavior when she was a small child to have any comparison, and also because CPTSD and autism are often somewhat indistinguishable from each other. Another theory that came up in my research was Elsa as an allegory for depression, particularly in the sense that depression is less, oh, I'm sad all the time, but more, I feel nothing other than emptiness and I'm a burden on society. Like, Let It Go is indicative of the moment where you're starting to break out of that feeling and feel like you can finally see the world in 3D again, or I've described it as you feel like you can finally see color again. And the concepts of anxiety and depression have been raised by some members of the film's like immediate creative team, so that may have genuinely been a part of the inspiration in writing various pieces of it. We can also look at Elsa as an allegory for queerness, and that many queer folks have adopted Let It Go as a sort of coming out song where Conceal Don't Feel is interpreted as trying to pretend that one is straight or cis. And also like the lines between coercive ABA interpretations we talked about earlier and conversion therapy interpretations are identical because they have the exact same root. Conversion therapy and ABA were created by the same guy. There were genuinely some boycotts of this film in 2013 because people saw it as a queer allegory. People are also interpreting Elsa's lack of love interest in the first film as implying that she may be asexual or that she may be queer, and there were just like no women in the first film. And in the second film, she does make a close friend in Honeymaren, so everybody just assumes they're gonna get married one day. I love the queer community. It's also important to note that historically almost all Disney villains have been coded as queer, which also includes asexual. The problem of coded unfeeling asexual villains is a whole situation in and of itself. And since Elsa was initially written to be a villain in the Disney canon, she was initially constructed in a deliberately queer-coded manner because Disney audiences get used to seeing a certain kind of person as a hero and another certain kind as a villain, and so the formula has stayed more or less identical, and they actually use this as sort of a bait and switch in this film in making you feel like Elsa's going to be the villain and completely knocking you off your feet with Hans because you don't expect that from him at all. So there is serious credence to the queer theory as well. Do I think she's gonna get a queer relationship in Frozen 3? Absolutely not. It's Disney. This is one of their largest franchises of all time. They don't want to risk alienating a portion of the audience because they're profit first, and they always will be. Some people still see her as the villain of this film and that she does do a whole lot of harm. I know I've seen discussions of like claiming her as the first neurodivergent queer princess is very concerning given that she's been the most harmful princess by far. In all fairness, Merida did turn her mother into a bear. I do understand this point. I will say that she is not the first neurodivergent princess, as I've shown with this series, and specifically autistic Belle and Ariel have been wider discussions for at least a decade, if not more. I kind of like that she does harm and that she's flawed and she has depth. I think on some level all humans cause harm to other humans, so like It's complicated. Anyway, next theory I came across was the cultural displacement theory, and that we learn in the second movie that the Northuldra know how to handle magic, and thus had Elsa been around her people, she would have learned to control her powers at a very young age, and literally none of the plot of the first film would have had to happen. I agree with this. They have a point. Also, the history of the Sami people and how they were involved in the making of this second film is fantastic. I have articles about that linked to the bottom of my sources in the description. You should check them out. And then the last theory is that Elsa is just not a well-developed character. I think she's better developed than I first thought she was when I started writing this, after hearing a lot of arguments in both directions. But at the end of the day, they did decide to have two protagonists, and they had to pick one to flesh out more than the other, and they chose Anna. Elsa is the one who has the narrative arc of changing as a person, but she also more or less only exists as a narrative prosthesis to carry the narrative of Anna would do anything to save her sister along, because that's the actual point of the film. Like, Elsa got the character arc, and Anna got the plot, and neither of them got a lot of the other thing, so the story and the characters do feel a bit disconnected. But by having that disconnection, where we get a lot of characteristics for Elsa but no plot, and a lot of plot for Anna and very few characteristics, it leaves us with a whole lot of gaps around Elsa. She is deeply mysterious and sort of cast off to the side, which has made pretty much every single minority group who is discriminated against for being different and is used to having our only representation in the media be the odd character out that only gets half a narrative and is relegated to the side most of the time, immediately clocked her as one of our own. And we filled in the blanks with our own interpretations of why she fits within our minority group. And I literally just made a 2.5-hour video about how some of the characters being deliberately messy and vaguified in the Sweeney Todd script is not poor writing, but rather narrative freedom to give audiences and actors alike something to work with in order to serve specific narrative goals, and also allows it to age really well because it has breathing room. And so I have to, ethically argue the same for Frozen. The other thing I want to bring into this conversation, though, is Wicked, because you can say that Frozen took no inspiration from a story about a princessy, bubbly, bouncy, social soprano witch who is best friends with a belt your face off, actually has magical powers, doesn't like to socialize, and is generally isolated and quiet witch, from a musical that was the first major one really ever to center around platonic love between women rather than having girls fight over a guy. But the fact that they chose Idina Menzel, the original belt your face off, actually has magical powers witch, who doesn't fit into society, to be their Elsa is not helping matters in this argument. I know they had a different Elsa first and then they changed it around the time the script went through major changes as well, but still, this is not a coincidence. As far as I can find, nobody in the Frozen team has specifically said that they took inspiration from it, but I'm sorry. The comparisons are just so much, particularly with Elsa and Anna versus Elphaba and Glinda, even name-wise, those names don't come from, anyway. Wicked focuses on primarily following Elphaba's narrative, and Glinda is sort of her plot vehicle, and they did the precise reverse in Frozen, though better developed in Wicked because Wicked is longer and has therefore more time to flesh out the characters. I've always felt like Frozen somewhat saw Elsa and Anna as extensions of Elphaba and Glinda, and because they had such clear images in their heads of what Elphaba and Glinda were like when they were making Elsa and Anna, they accidentally cut some narrative corners that limited their personality without realizing that they did it because they had much more context in their heads from their inspiration characters. Kind of like when you see somebody complain about a movie character and how they're not fleshed out entirely, you get angry because clearly they are, but then you realize that that person has never read the book or seen one of the other films, so they don't have the extra context, but you have that context, so you're not bothered by how not fleshed out the character is. I feel like a very similar phenomenon happened here with this film. Also, now that the musical is out, the pipeline of Elsa's to Elphabas and Anna's to Glindas and back and forth does not help their case. Putting this on stage made it feel like an off-brand, slightly less developed, aged-down Wicked, which is so interesting to me in regards to how we perceive different things in different mediums. But anyway, the reason that I bring this up is because tying back into autism and Elsa, Elphaba is written as developmentally disabled from birth in the original Wicked text, and that was then adapted into the musical. I have a 70-ish minute video that I will link above about the history of disability in Wicked that discusses Nessa Rose as well as Elphaba and Glinda through an autistic lens, but I think that's where we get a lot of these traits from. Elsa has always been a slightly watered down Elphaba to me. I would say, quote, to be more kid-friendly. Wicked's pretty kid-friendly, so maybe to be more toddler-friendly, I guess. But to me, the history of that, in addition to the history of the Snow Queen's author being an autistic person, though I guess he wasn't really involved in what Elsa became whatsoever, but just whatever, it doesn't really matter. Either way, this indicates that there is more to disability with this character than what we initially see when we look at her just based on the origins behind how this character was created. But also, on a super basic angle, They made Elsa and Anna be polar opposites of each other, and they bent them both to the extreme directions on either side to make sure the point got across, and also because they are somewhat meant to be borderline archetypal and caricatured, and anything out of the norm in either direction is going to read as neurodivergent, and we interpret it in that way. That has always been the case with humanity, which is why Anna also reads as super autistic, just in a completely opposite direction. I could also go on about how the majority of animated movement in kids' films is so over the top as to read as dyspraxic movement, in that while it exists as a tool to be engaging for young people, the characters will always be in motion and be over the top about all of it, but that's also how many people with physical developmental disorders move, and so therefore by making it more engaging and easier to follow, they end up making it inherently disabled. But that's not the focus of today's video. I think overall every single theory about Elsa and her behavior and how we can read her are all true at the same time and can all be true at the same time. I kind of feel like they are all true at the same time. That's what makes analyses like this fun, to see all these different angles from different communities. We get to use media to understand all kinds of experiences and see how much they can intersect and intertwine with each other, which I find to be fascinating. But anyway, I'm gonna end this one here. Do let me know what you think about this in the comments. Let me know if there's anything I missed or any fun facts you know about Frozen that I don't, because I know this is a special interest for a lot of people in this community. And yeah, as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Remember to thank you for listening. Thank you for learning. Remember, it is never too late to start over, and I look forward to seeing you, my dear, in the next one.